Hey everybody, how's it going? So since YouTube has been blocking the last couple of deep dive episodes that I have tried to do, I'm going to try to do something a little different today. I am going to rank all of the Beatles songs, all 196 songs that they released on the studio albums during their lifetime as a band. Not stuff from the anthology, not stuff from the Tony Sheridan tapes or the Decca tapes or alternate outtakes or stuff that wasn't really, none of that stuff. I'm not including it. I'm just including their core songs from their studio albums and also their singles, A's and B sides. So anyway, these are just my own personal favorites. I always have to make that disclaimer at the beginning of every video because invariably somebody is going to say, why is that rank so high, or why do you have that rank so low? So these are just my own personal preferences. Your list, if you're a Beatles fan, is going to be radically different, I'm sure. So anyway, this is just my list, and I'm going to have to do this in several parts. I'm not going to tackle all those songs in one episode, so we'll see how far we get in episode 1. So at 196, my least favorite Beatles song of all time, I am going with Matchbox, which is a Carl Perkins cover that Ringo sings. It was originally on the Long Tall Sally EP. Carl Perkins is okay. I'm just not a fan of some of these early Beatle covers, and Matchbox does absolutely nothing for me. I mean, the Beatles turn in a decent arrangement on it, but I'm just not a fan of that whole kind of like rockabilly Carl Perkins stuff that they covered. So that is going to be 196. 195, I'm going with Mr. Moonlight off the Beatles for Sale / Beatles 65 album. John turns in a great vocal performance, but the song and the arrangement, I'm just not a fan of. I don't care for that Hammond organ solo in the middle. And the song itself, I just find pretty lackluster, nothing special about it. I think it was Doctor and the Medics, a cover, if I'm not mistaken. So anyway, 195, Mr. Moonlight. 194, another cover, but this time George takes the vocal, and this was on the With the Beatles album and the Beatles' second album in the US, and I'm talking about Devil in Her Heart. Never been a fan of this song. George turns in an okay vocal, on the song, but it really is one of those Beatles songs that I just skip over. I don't hate it. I don't hate any of these songs, but there are some that I just don't really care to listen to all that much. All right, 193, Dig It, off of Let It Be. Again, I don't hate the song, but it's really kind of insubstantial in terms of Beatles songs. It's just kind of John riffing, doing an improvisational. This was like a studio jam when they were at the Apple offices in the latter part of the Let It Be sessions. And it's an off-the-cuff, John just kind of having fun as the other Beatles and Billy Preston are jamming away behind him. It's a little fun. I like the fact that Phil Spector edited it down from the original 9-minute version that you can find on some bootlegs, but it's okay. It's just, kind of almost afterthought that it got stuck on that album. Number 192, speaking of short and substantial songs from the Let It Be sessions and the Let It Be album, I'm going with Maggie May. It's almost like a half performance. It feels like the song breaks down after a verse and part of the chorus. It's just a fun little sing-along. I'm glad it's on Let It Be. I like the fact that it ends side 1. But it's just not a song that I rush to play. It's not on any of my Beatle playlists that I have. It's just a little novelty song, I guess you might call it. Number 191, Her Majesty off of Abbey Road. This was originally part of the Mean Mr. Muster medley. came right after Mean Mr. Mustard. That jarring chord that you hear at the beginning was the final note in Mean Mr. Mustard. And it was supposed to be sandwiched between that and Polythene Pam. And then Paul thought better of it and cut it out of the medley altogether and then just stuck it at the very end of the Abbey Road album. It's a charming little ditty, but again, as far as Beatles songs go, nothing really special, nothing to write home about. Number 190 is going to be Long Tall Sally. I've never cared for this song. I mean, Little Richard, yeah, he's great. Paul does a fantastic vocal, but this song, it just is too much 50s for me. I don't care for it all that much. And it's not a song that I really go back to and listen to. If I'm playing the album all the way through, it's on Beatles' second album, I just don't, I don't care to listen to it all that much. Number 189, going to the White Album for Revolution 9. I probably like this, if you can call it a song, more than most people do, but it is what it is. It's a sound collage that John made, probably under the influence of some drugs and with Yoko Ono's influence, definitely. It's 9 minutes long. It takes up way too much time on the White Album. I feel like I've made the point before. I feel like they could have put a George song, one of the songs that he had written, that he demoed back when they were doing the Esher tapes. But nonetheless, it is what it is. We have it. It's 9 minutes long, but again, it's at the bottom in terms of my Beatle favorites or less than favorites. Number 188 is going to be Money, another cover from with the Beatles album. It was on Beatles' second album, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, Money. It's a cover of a Motown song. I forget who the original artist was on it. And the Beatles do a fine performance of it. It's a great vocal by John, but these covers, these early Beatles covers, are some of my least favorite of the entire Beatles catalog. Number 187, this was off the Yellow Submarine soundtrack. I am going with All Together Now. I love playing the songs for my kids when they were little. They enjoy the sing-song quality of it. It's a very charming song for children. I love how they're all singing together. John taking the chop the tree, sail the ship, that whole part I think is cool. I love how it picks up in tempo at the end, but it's sort of a poor man's Yellow Submarine at the end of the day. Number 186, Wild Honey Pie. This is one of those songs that, did it need to be on the White Album? Probably not. But they had so many songs, and at that point, they were like, we're going to record whatever pops into our head or whatever fragments of songs we have lying around. A lot of this album was written when the Beatles were in India. And this was a song that Paul apparently put on the album because it was a favorite. I believe Patty Harrison, if I'm not mistaken, enjoyed this little, for the most part, instrumental with some goofy vocals. All the vocals are by Paul. He just kind of tracked himself over and over again, singing in various silly voices. It works fine on the White Album, but as a standalone song, it's really not much to get excited about. Okay, 185, Till There Was You, a song from The Music Man. It was part of their early stage repertoire. It's on Meet the Beatles, and it's on With the Beatles. It's a show tune cover. Paul does a great vocal with it. It's a fantastic arrangement, very well produced, but I'm just not a huge fan of the song. It's a nice showcase for Paul's crooning type vocal, but as far as Beatles songs go, it's definitely near the bottom for me. Number 184, I'm going to go with Boys. Again, another girl group cover. Ringo turns in a great vocal performance, but as I've said before about these early Beatles covers, I'm just not a huge fan. Number 183, going to the Hard Day's Night album for the first time with I'm Happy Just to Dance for You. This seems like a real throwaway track, like John and Paul just kind of writing something very quickly, gave it to George to sing, and it's, fine enough. I love the Hard Day's Night album, and this song I don't hate, but it's definitely a very weak track in terms of early Beatles music. Number 182, gonna go back to the White Album. And I love the White Album, but some of the songs on the White Album are just not top shelf Beatles songs. I'm going with Don't Pass Me By. How many Ringo songs have I had on my list already? I don't know. I'm not keeping track necessarily, but Don't Pass Me By is okay. It's better than it should be. It's Ringo's first composition, and he had this song kicking around since 1964. There are some interviews with the Beatles in Australia, and they're kind of joking around like Ringo wrote a song and he sings the first couple of lines from Don't Pass Me By. So he had that song around since the very early days. I think he, like George, was being encouraged to dabble in some songwriting, but obviously he was nowhere near as talented or prolific as George Harrison was. Number 181, Honey Pie. Had Wild Honey Pie, now we got Honey Pie. And Paul was always kind of a fan of the 1920s, 1930s style. His father was in a jazz band growing up. And so I think Paul's always had an affection for these kind of songs, the kind of songs that John would later characterize as Paul's granny music. But it's a fine song. I like it in the context of the White Album, but separating it out doesn't really do a whole lot for me. Number 180, Ask Me Why, off of the Please Please Me album, or in the US, the early Beatles, or Introducing the Beatles, depending on which version you have. One of John's first attempts at writing a ballad, and it's a nice song. It's a nice effort. Good job, John. But it really is an affectionate song, and I enjoy it. Again, in the context of the Please Please Me album, I think it works very well. But that's my take on that song. 179, a song that the Beatles gave to the Rolling Stones. They recorded it themselves. Another Ringo song, I Want to Be Your Man. I kind of like this song. It works very well on both the With the Beatles album and the Meet the Beatles album. I got to rank all these songs somewhere, and this one is falling near the bottom for me. Number 178, going to the Help album for You Like Me Too Much. And it's an interesting lyrical theme for George Harrison to tackle right here, where you've got two lovers who just can't seem, even though they're in what seems like a toxic relationship, they just can't break up with each other for whatever reason. So interesting topic for George to write a song about. A little more complex of a love song than he had tackled to that point. And I like it. I like the organ on it, the electric organ. I think is very cool how it kind of picks up, gets funkier as the song goes on. And it's a very charming early George song. I do like it, but it's just near the bottom for me. 177, What Goes On? Again, with the Ringo songs. I'm sorry if you're a Ringo fan, but just some of these Ringo songs, they just kind of tossed off these songs and gave them to Ringo. What Goes On was one of the earliest songs that John and Paul wrote. They were very kind to give Ringo a co-writing credit on here, although I can't imagine what he contributed outside of maybe the drum part. I don't know if he threw in a lyric or if they were just being kind and giving him a co-writer's credit. The only time that you have this three-way writer's credit on a Beatles song. So it's fine. I don't hate it. I know some people absolutely hate this song and might rank it at the bottom. I feel that it doesn't belong on Rubber Soul, but we have it, and that's where it falls in my ranking. So anyway, I'm going to end this one right here, and I will pick up with 176 through whatever. Hope you're enjoying this video, and let me know in the comment section if you agree, disagree. Again, it's my own personal taste, so don't get too bent out of shape. All right, take care.